Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim and this video is for the lecture week 3. In this lecture, you will study cognition from the Buddhist perspective. How the Buddha explained human cognitive system, or what kind of component make up our cognition, etc. Dhammapada is one of Buddhist sutra found in Khuddaka Nikaya. Dhammapada defines perception like this. Preceded by perception are mental states. For them is perception supreme. From perception have they sprung. If with perception polluted one speaks or acts, thence suffering follows, as a wheel the drought ox foot. Preceded by perception are mental states. For them is perception supreme. From perception have they sprung. If with a tranquil perception one speaks or acts, thence ease follows, as a shadow that never departs. So you can find two kinds of cognition. One is perception, the other one is mental state. Perception is followed by mental state. So this stanza signifies perception in the Buddhist perspective. Understanding the working of mind is seen as central to progress on the path and the achievement of awakening. Extensive discussion about the working of mind to be found throughout the Buddhist scriptures. Systematic treatment to be found in such schools of idealism as the Abhidhamma and Yogacara. Buddhist perspective on perception finds a critical perspective from which to evaluate the contemporary relevance of traditional Buddhist teachings. Buddhist perspective on perception provide Buddhist models of consciousness and its transformation critically different from those already under consideration in cognitive science. Understanding the mind as mechanism characterized by the creation and manipulation of representation. So the significance of perception in Buddhism encounter with reality and knowledge is given to the senses. Because of our senses, by seeing, by hearing, by smelling, by tasting, by touching, all sorts of suffering can be generated. So how we deal with the senses is very important. Therefore, innumerable appearances in Buddhist canon regarding perceptual process by means of senses. So how humans work with the senses is very important in terms of transforming human mind. Primary emphasis on consciousness in the transformation of human existence. There are 6 kinds of sense organ compared to 5 senses in the West. Last week, you studied 5 kinds of senses in the West, but in Buddhist perspective, there are 6 kinds of sense organs. Let's see the entities and processes described by Buddhist psychology. Mahapunama Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya, the oldest monk asked the Buddha about the 5 aggregates of grasping, how craving developed, and would cease with respect to each aggregate. So I will introduce Mahapunama Sutta a little bit later, but in this sutra, 5 aggregates are explained in detail. 5 aggregates are Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, and Vijnana. What we perceive to be a self as a collection or concatenation of 5 aggregates. When there are these 5 aggregates, there is a person. 5 aggregates can be subdivided into 2 types. One is nama, mental faculty, and rupa, just form. So nama and rupa means nama means mental faculty, mentality, and rupa sounds like body, but that's not true. Buddhism rejects the distinction between body and mind. The rupa just simply indicate form or physical aspect. Actually, rupa unified state of mind and body. Consciousness only exists in the field created by the perceiver and the perceived. The dualistic interpretation is a mistaken belief by especially Yogacara. So you must know what component make up 5 aggregate: Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, Vijnana. And Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, Vijnana can be categorized into nama, and Rupa is just more like a form, or you might think about some physical aspect, but this Rupa form already unified states of mind and body. With regard to the 5 aggregate, I introduce Mahapunama Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya. This sutra is called the Great Full Moon Night Discourse. It starts, "Thus I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in the eastern monastery, the palace of Megara's mother. And on that occasion, Uposada of the 15th, the night of a very full moon, he was sitting out in the open with the community of monks. Very well, then, monk. Sit back down in your seat and ask whatever you want." Responding to the Blessed One, "Yes, Lord," the monk sat back down in his seat and said to the Blessed One, "Under the 5 cleaning aggregate, namely form as a cleaning aggregate, feeling as a cleaning aggregate, perception as a cleaning aggregate, fabrication, consciousness as a cleaning aggregate. Monk, these are the 5 cleaning aggregates. Form as a cleaning aggregate, feeling, perception, fabrication, consciousness as a cleaning aggregate." Saying, "Very good, Lord," the monk delighted and approved of the Blessed One's word, and then asked him a further question. "But in what, Lord, are these 5 cleaning aggregates rooted?" The Buddha answered, "Monk, these 5 cleaning aggregates are rooted in desire." "What is the cause, sir? What is the reason why the aggregate of form is found? What is the cause? what is the reason why the aggregate of feeling, perception, choices, consciousness is found. The four primary elements are the reason why the aggregate of a form is found. Contact is the reason why the aggregate of a feeling, perception, and choices are found. Name and form, in other words, nama and rupa, are the reasons why the aggregate of a consciousness is found. But the Buddha, how does identity view come about? If these five aggregates constitute human, then how does identity view come out? It's when an uneducated ordinary person has not seen the noble ones and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They have not seen good persons and are neither skilled nor trained in the teachings of the good persons. They regard form as self, self as having form, form in self, or self in form. They regard feeling as self, self as having feeling, feeling in self, or self in feeling. They regard perception as self, self as having perception, perception in self, or self in perception. They regard choices as self, self as having choices, choices in self, or self in choices. They regard consciousness as self, self as having consciousness, consciousness in self, or self in consciousness. That's how identity view comes about. But sir, how does identity view not come about? It's when an educated noble disciple has seen the noble ones and is skilled and trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've seen good persons and are skilled and trained in the teaching of the good persons. They do not regard the form as self. They do not regard the self as having form, not form in self, or not self in form. They do not regard the feeling as self, do not regard the self as having feeling, not regard the feeling in self, or not regard the self in feeling. They do not regard the perception as self, self as having perception, perception in self, or self in perception. They do not regard choices as self, self as having choices, choices in self, or self in choices. They do not regard consciousness as a self. They do not regard self as having consciousness, do not regard consciousness in self, or do not regard self in consciousness. That's how identity view does not come about. What is the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness? I think I forgot telling you that five aggregate. Form is rupa. Vedana means feeling. Sanya, perception. Samkara, choices or mental fabrication. And vijnana, consciousness. So, what's the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to form, when it comes to five aggregates? The pleasure and happiness that arise from form. This is its gratification. That form is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. This is its drawback. Removing and giving up desire and greed for form. This is its escape. So the Buddha expounded us how we escape from suffering by way of senses. The pleasure and happiness that arise from feeling, perception, choices, consciousness, this is its gratification. That consciousness is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. So all five aggregates is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. This is its drawback, removing and giving up desire and greed for consciousness. This is its escape from suffering. Then, how does one know and see so that there's no ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli? One truly see any kind of form at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, all form with the right understanding. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. One truly sees any kinds of feeling, perception, choices, consciousness at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, all consciousness with right understanding. This is not mine. I'm not this. This is not myself. That's how to know and see so that there's no ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. So if you think that, oh, this feeling is not myself, this perception is not mine, I'm not this perception is not myself, such that it's possible that some foolish person here think they can overstep the teacher's instructions. So it seems good, sir, that Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana are not myself. Mahapanuma Sutta offers the detailed examination of the five aggregates by pointing out that clinging is neither identical with the five aggregates nor something apart from them, but consists in desire in regard to them. When you feel suffering, you are grasped with the idea of this is mine, I am this is myself. That is how to know and see so that there's ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. In regard to each aggregate, such as Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, a sense of identity can arise, which can take place by taking the aggregate to be the self, or by postulating the self as the owner of the aggregate, or by assuming the aggregate to exist within the self, or by locating the self within the aggregate. Inquire how to go beyond identification and conceit in regard to the body and external signs so that you can clearly awaken ego, possessiveness, and underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. So I briefly introduced Mahapanuma Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya, but I strongly encourage you to read Mahapanuma Sutra from Majjhima Nikaya. So once you type Mahapanuma Sutra on internet, you can easily pull out this sutra. It's not a very long sutra, so you can read through entire sutra. 5 aggregate can be subdivided into nama and rupa. Let's look at nama and rupa a little bit detail. Rupa indicate form. Rupa is derived from the 4 great element. 4 great element form rupa. What are the 4 great element? 4 great element is called Mahabhuta. What are the 4 great elements? Earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. These 4 kinds of great element compose of rupa. I mentioned that rupa as form or maybe some physical aspect or materials. But Buddhist perspective unify mind and body. Therefore, even these 4 great elements include some mental aspect, such as earth element is for the solidity and extension, water element for fluidity and cohesion, fire element for the temperature of cold and heat, air element for descension and mobility. Not simply consider properties of material entities, but consider concretized instantiations of sensorial texture. So these material entities include some sensorial textures. For example, solidity and extension for earth element, etc. Nama, mental factors. So the rest 4 aggregate, such as Vedana, Sanya, Samkara, Vijnana, they all belong to Nama, mental factors. Vedana means feeling, Sanya, perception, Samkara, mental progress or mental fabrication, and Vijnana, consciousness. So the term rupa include more complexity in terms of processes and functions which are definitely not only physical. Last time when you study sense is a system that translates information from external stimuli into neural activity. In the West, there are 5 sense organs. In Buddhist perspective, there are 6 sense organs. They are eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Mind is one of the sense organs in the Buddhist perspective. This is quite different from the West. To eye, object field is visible. Therefore, vision is the sensation. To ear, audible is the object field, and then sound is the sensation. Nose has object field, smells, and sensation is smelling. Tongue has object field, taste, and taste is the sensation. The object field of a body is touchable, and human can have sensation of touch. What about the mind? Mind is one of the sense organ. What is object field of mind? It's the Dhamma. Dhamma means the object of mind or your experience. So it could be your feeling, it could be emotion, so many object fields can belong to Dhamma. Some idea, memory, some mental factors can be the object field of mind. When mind has object field Dhamma, then idea, thought, sensations arise. So keep in mind, Buddhism have one more sense organ called mind. And the object field of mind is Dhamma. Dhamma means object of mind, things, quality, object of experience, or maybe phenomena. 6 types of perceptual consciousness. So when you look at 6 types of perceptual consciousness, 5 types belong to externally and 1 mentally directed perception. So when you look at sense organ, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, those are 5 external directed perception. And mind is mentally directed perception. Object field, you saw that previous slide. And then what kind of a perceptual consciousness you can have? For eye, visible consciousness, ear, auditory consciousness, for nose, olfactory consciousness, tongue, gustatory consciousness, body, tactile consciousness, and mind has mental consciousness. So when I contact visible object field, then visible consciousness arises. Let's look at thought process. So here's 5 externally directed consciousness resulted from 5 sense organ: eye, nose, ear, mouth, and body. And they have their own object field, and then they generate perceptual consciousness. These 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness. But when you look at mind, one mentally directed sense organ, mind, has object field, Dhamma, mind object. As well as this mind sense organ has another object field, that is this 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness can be the object field of mind. So mind has 2 categories for object field. One is just Dhamma. You see in previous slide, Dhamma is the object field of mind, as well as this 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness. All these perceptual consciousness can be the object field of mind. So, mind has Dhamma as object field, as well as these all 5 types of perceptual consciousness generated by 5 sense organ can be the object field of mind also. When Dhamma is the object field of mind, it generates mental consciousness. And these 5 externally directed perceptual consciousness become the object field of mind, then mental perceptual consciousness can be generated. So, mental consciousness, in other words, when mind object is the object field of mind, mental consciousness is produced, and this mental consciousness is called Manodhatu. The characteristic of Manodhatu is the first attention with respect to Dhamma. serve as a specific filter to the sixth sense. Sixth sense is the mind. Collecting out subjective responses to our objective environment. Dhammas denote a pluralistic representation of the world. Mind element activate their respective sense consciousness to function. So, it's a little bit complicated system, but mind is definitely one of the sense organ in Buddhism. And sense organ has sense object. And in terms of mind, the object field can be mind object, Dhamma. And when mind has Dhamma as an object field, then mental consciousness are followed. But mind also has another kinds of object field, such as 5 physically directed consciousness. This 5 physically directed consciousness can be generated by the rest 5 sense organ, contact its own object field, then 5 externally directed consciousness are produced. These 5 physically directed consciousness can be the object field to mind sense organ. Then mental perceptual consciousness are produced. So you can see how Mano Dhatu, mental consciousness, and Mano Vijnana Dhatu, mental perceptual consciousness, fit into its fairly sophisticated system of the thought process. So I see the visible object, then visible consciousness arise. This visible consciousness will be object field to the mind. Then visible perceptual consciousness is followed. So let's look at the framework of the thought process. 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness become a set of cognitive experience in the thought process arise. This is called Mano Dhatu. This Mano Dhatu is raw material for thought process. You will not have a fully matured thought. You just the beginning part of a thought process. Mano Dhatu is the first attention with regard to Dhamma and special filter to the sixth sense. The sixth sense is mind. Then thought process further processed that eventually the appropriate Mano Vijnana Dhatu, mental perceptual consciousness arise. This culminating in the comprehension of the input data. Grasping and knowing occur through the operation of Mano Vijnana Dhatu. So 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness arise from the contact between sense organ and sense object. And these 5 physically directed consciousness become object field to the sense organ mind. Then mental perceptual consciousness arise. This mental perceptual consciousness allow you to culminate the comprehension of the input data. That is one route for mental perceptual consciousness. But without 5 physically directed consciousness, just your mind object, such as your thought, quality, or object of mind, or object of experience, or some phenomena, those objects feel contact to the mind and mental consciousness arise. Therefore, you suddenly feel happy, or you think that, oh, I don't know why I feel some sadness. That kinds of emotion, mental consciousness can be followed. When you compare two kinds of consciousness, there's some different characteristics between Manodhatu and Manoviññāna-dhātu. So if we consider the characteristics of different types of consciousness, for example, in terms of discrimination or recollection, then this perceptual consciousness, Manodhatu, does not have any discrimination or recollection. But mental perceptual consciousness has discrimination and recollections are associated. So when we go back to this table, this mental consciousness is not associated with discrimination and recollection, but this mental perceptual consciousness associated with recollection and discrimination. This mental perceptual consciousness is one step further processed compared to this Manodhatu mental consciousness. Manodhatu is weakly associated with insight, but mental perceptual consciousness is strongly associated and activity in terms of insight. What about mindfulness? Manodhatu weakly associated, but Manoviññāna-dhātu is strongly associated and activity. When we compare Manodhatu and Manoviññāna-dhātu in terms of category object field, Manoviññāna-dhātu apprehend an object field of more than a single category in one moment. So in this case, more than single category of object field. So 5 physically directed consciousness, more than single perceptual consciousness can be the object of mano, to arise Manoviññāna-dhātu. Also, time period of object field is different between Manodhatu and Manoviññāna-dhātu. In terms of Manoviññāna-dhātu, several moments of mental perceptual consciousness apprehend the same object support. In other words, this mental perceptual consciousness has more processed step than Manodhatu in terms of time period. So, a unified or non-dual view of human cognition can provide a means of discussing practice and its effect in such a fashion as to avoid implicitly reinstantiating dualist concepts of the body and mind. I addressed that Buddhist perspective of sense impression is important. Why? In one aspect of Buddhist cognition is focused. Sense impression is the root cause of sorrow. Sense impression is the product of 2 factors. One is rupa, the external stimuli. The other one is nama, the subjective individual. Seek to put an end to sorrow by attacking its cause. External stimuli, rupa, cease to impinging on the individual, the cause of sorrow be removed. So if you get rid of all sense contact, sense organ, sensory contact, then you are free from suffering. But is it possible? This could happen only if the individual would recede within himself, withdraw into his own mind. So if practitioner concentrate on one sense organ such as mind, then it facilitates to remove the cause of sorrow. Therefore, develop a kind of consciousness which would be different from the normal diversity producing kind of consciousness. The ordinary peoples are busy with so many kinds of things physically, mentally, but only practicing with single sense organ such as mind that can facilitate remove suffering. Because consciousness is generated by the interaction of the sense organs with external stimuli. So consciousness is just one of those causal relations obtaining in the physical world. This might be the reason why the Buddha emphasized on meditation practice. Transitory phenomena of mental and physical phenomena. Transitory phenomena means changing every moment and yielding place to new. The moment when you feel something, the moment when you realize something, that is transitory phenomena. You might aware on that moment, but the very next moment it is already changed. Therefore, no purpose in being attached to them. These phenomena keep changing, so you cannot grab one single unchanged moment. The dualism of mind and matter is inevitable in all thinking and in all perceiving. When the individual turned his attention upon himself and stopped all thinking activities, both the external world as well as his empirical consciousness ceased to exist. Both the notion of I and the notion of the world were consistently done away with. Because of transitory phenomena of mental and physical phenomena, even it is not reasonable to put I on a certain phenomena or a certain moment. Therefore, the Western philosophy, Descartes, says, I think, therefore I am, might be a delusion, because I am not I who think. Buddhism reduces both the material world and the subjective individual to a series of sensations. This brings the implicit reference to a kind of consciousness different from normal sense consciousness. One can intuitively grasp the nature of reality by cultivating consciousness, eliminating the concept of self. Rupa, translated in form, is not as mere matter or physical aspect, but as organic sensation. Rupa already unified mind and matter. In early Buddhism, matter and the external world were not categorically denied. It is relative existence. So I'm going to introduce two kinds of Buddhist sutra. One of them is when the yogi has come to an extreme edge of a sense activity, he should stop thinking at all. In this condition, he has attained the true wisdom. Potthapada Sutta. This sutra portrays the mode by which the Buddha responded to the controversial issue of his days. The mode to discuss on the ultimate cessation of perception was to adopt the terms of the discussion, but to invest them with his own meanings, and then to try to direct the discussion to the practice leading to the cessation of suffering and stress. At the end of this sutra, the Buddha described them as the world's designation, the world's expression, the world's ways of speaking, the world's description with which the Buddha expresses himself but without grasping at them. In other words, the Buddha picks them up for the purpose at hand and then let them go. Thus, they are not to be regarded as central to his teaching. Instead, they should be read as example of his ability to adapt the language of his interlocutor to his own purposes. Let's look at some portion of Potthapada Sutra. Thus, I've heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in Jeta Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Now on that occasion, Potthapada the Wanderer, together with a large following of 300 wanderers, had taken up residence in the debating hall near the Tinduka tree in the single pavilion park of Queen Malika. Then the Blessed One, early in the morning, taking his robe and bowl, entering Savatthi for alms. Then the thought occurred to him, why it is still too early to go into Savatthi for alms. Why don't I go to the debating hall near the Tinduka tree in the single pavilion park of Queen Malika to see Potthapada the Wanderer? So he went to the debating hall near the Tinduka tree in the single pavilion park of Queen Malika. This is the background of Potthapada Sutta. Then the Blessed One went to Potthapada, and Potthapada said to the Buddha, "Come, Blessed One, welcome, Blessed One. It's been a long time since the Blessed One has gone out of his way to come here. Sit down, Blessed One. This seat has been prepared." So the Blessed One sat on the prepared seat. Potthapada, taking a lower seat, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, the Blessed One said to him, "For what topic of conversation are you gathering together here? In the midst of what topic of conversation have you been interrupted?" When this was said, Potthapada replied, "Never mind, Lord, about the topic of conversation for which we have gathered here. It will not be difficult for the Blessed One to hear about that later. For the past few days, a discussion has arisen among the many sects of Brahmins and contemplatives gathered and sitting together in the debating hall concerning the ultimate cessation of perception. How is there the ultimate cessation of perception? With regard to this, some said a person's perception arises and ceases without cause, without reason. When it arises, one is percipient. When it ceases, one is not percipient. That's how one group described the ultimate cessation of perception. So main topic of debating is cessation of perception. Why? Perception can rule as a cause of suffering. Therefore, when perception is ceased, then humans can escape from suffering. So they discuss about the ultimate cessation of perception. In this sutra, the Buddha introduced 3 acquisitions of a self. So the gross self and mind-made self and formless acquisition of a self. The Buddha teaches the Dhamma for the sake of abandoning every acquisition of a self, such that when you practice it, defiling mental qualities will be abandoned, bright mental qualities will grow, and you will enter and remain in the culmination and abundance of discernment, having known and realized it for yourself in the here and now. So this sutra expounds how to shape your perception, which can influence our inner goal on stimulus selection. So it's very long sutra. That's why it belongs to Digha Nikaya. I strongly suggest you to read through this Potthapada Sutra and think about self in relation to perception. Another sutra named Samanapala Sutra, introduced to attain awakening by way of the Buddhist path of cognition. Samanapala Sutra is called the fruit of the contemplative life. It starts, thus I've heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying at Rajagaha in Jivaka Kumarabachar's mango grove, with a large community of monks, 1,250 monks in all. Now at the time, it being the observance day, the full moon night of the water lily season, the first month of the rain, King Ajatasattu of Magadha, the son of Queen Bidana, was sitting on the roof terrace of his palace surrounded by his ministers. Then he felt inspired to exclaim, "How wonderful is this moonlight night! How beautiful, how lovely, how inspiring, how auspicious is this moonlight night! What Brahman or contemplative should we visit tonight who might enlighten and bring peace to our mind?" All this time, Jivaka Kumaravachar was sitting silently, not far from the king. So the king said to him, "Friend Jivaka, why are you silent?" "Your Majesty, there is the Blessed One, worthy and rightly self-awakened, staying in my mango grove with a large community of monks, 1,250 monks in all. Concerning this Blessed One, this admirable report has been spread. Surely the Blessed One is worthy and rightly self-awakened, consummate in clear knowing and conduct, well gone, an expert with regard to the cosmos, an excelled trainer of tameable people, teacher of being human and divine, awakened, blessed. Your Majesty should visit him. Perhaps if you visit him, he would enlighten and bring peace to your mind." And I extract some part of Samanapala Sutta. So this slide includes some part of Samanapala Sutta. "Lord, there are these common craftsmen, elephant trainer, horse trainer, charioteers, archers, standard bearers, camp marshals, supply corps officers, high royal officers, commanders, military heroes, armor-clad warriors, leather-clad warriors, domestic slaves, all these so many kinds of occupations. They live off the fruit of their crafts, visible in the here and now. They give pleasure and refreshment to themselves, to their parents, wives, and children, to their friends and colleagues. They put in place an excellent presentation of offerings to Brahmans and contemplatives, leading to heaven, resulting in happiness conducive to a heavenly rebirth. Is it possible, Lord, to point out a similar fruit of the contemplative life visible in the here and now?" In this course, you know that Ajatasattu visit the Buddha in hopes that the latter will bring some peace to his mind. The question he puts to the Buddha showed the limited level of his own understanding. So the Buddha patiently described the steps of the training, beginning at a very basic level and gradually moving up as a way of raising the king's spiritual horizons. So, Samanapala Sutta in Digha Nikaya expound that when the mind is made pure and plastic and stilled, tranquil by exercise such as meditation, it bends over in the direction of insight. This insight facilitates understanding that the body is an impure concatenation of the four great elements, and the consciousness is there stationed and bound upon to it. I also encourage you read through Samanapala Sutra so that how these four great elements compose rupa. Also further, the rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana, all these five aggregates work together, and how these five aggregates will participate in purified consciousness. One of Buddhist scholar, Buddhaghosa, admit the existence in nature of matter and its qualities. The external world was real and so was Nibbana. Depending on how you interpret the phenomena, it can be real. It all depends on your perceptual consciousness. Matter exists in a constant state of flux, and a normal perception was the result of the attunement of the individual to the movement of matter outside him. Nibbana is considered both as an objective sphere beyond that of the world of matter and subjectively as a state reached by meditation. So, have a fine-tuning of individual to the movement of matter outside him can reach by meditation practice. So the individual is reduced to a bundle of sensations. These sensations including his entire knowledge of the external world as well. Buddha was explained mind as a process without substance, and he made an unique contribution to psychology in the ancient world by describing mental activity as a continuum. Dhammakirti addressed external reality was essentially not knowable because it was perceived only for a moment. It is quite easy to draw the conclusion of a pure subjectivism from the utterance of this old text. Dignaga said, external world is simply a creation of the mind. Everything was changing and mere phenomena. Hence, there could be no reality behind them. As far as the individual was concerned, the external world could cease to exist. Nagarjuna stressed, argue from the relativity of all phenomena to the existence of the unrelated. Though there was no idealism in the original statement, it could easily be interpreted to mean that the external world was a projection of the mind. So you will see the phenomena basis of your mind. What kind of a mind you will see the phenomena? How you interpret the world depending on your mind, because external world is the projection of your mind. Still, there are arguments between two different functions, seeing and sensing. Does your eye already know the visible object? Or the very next step, sensation allow you to know what sees, the visual organ sees, or visual consciousness allow you to see? There's group of Buddhist people called Vaibhasika. They propose the eye sees. When your eye sees, that allow you to aware. How it does not see when other forms of consciousness are operative. Then some argument occurs how it does not see when the other forms of consciousness are operative. It can only do so when associated with visual consciousness. Therefore, the eye sees is not correct. This seeing by the eye substance, which is of the nature of what which sees, has its function, a mere function of seeing visual forms. This mere seeing of a visual form is vastly different from the perceiving from sensation. So, Vaibhasika proposed that you think that visual consciousness or sensation allow you to see, but before visual consciousness, your eye already see the object field and aware of them. But this seeing by eye is mere seeing, is different from the perceiving from sensation. And Dhammatratta proposed the consciousness sees, not the eye sees. All consciousness having only the characteristic of cognizing and not seeing, how can it see visual forms? So the argument says that if only the consciousness sees, the main function of all consciousness is cognizing, not seeing. Then how can it see visible forms? How can consciousness see visible form? Because the main job of consciousness is cognizing, not seeing. Visual consciousness can exercise its function of cognizing visual form only by relying on the force of the eye, and that the function, sensation, etc. of Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara must rely on the mind. So they defend themselves by saying that visual consciousness exercises its function of cognizing, cognition of a visual form. But this cognition of a visual form rely on the force of physical sense organ. So several Buddhist groups propose differently. Which proposal you prefer depends on you. The clear thing is, in Buddhist perspective of cognition, qualitative aspect is more emphasized than just mechanical operation of cognition, which focused on in the West world. Which of the following is not one of five aggregates? You know the answer? When the five aggregates are subcategorized, what is the mental faculty called? Also, you can find this answer from the video. Rupa, form, is derived from four great elements. Which of the following is not four great elements? So what kind of element compose four great elements? So you solve these three quizzes and then submit answer. This is the example of submitting week 3 assignment. My email address, include your email address on CC, and subject title, Board for 20, week 3. In main text body, you start with your official name last name, comma, followed by first name. Then you write down your answers. I stress that writing official name is important, otherwise you cannot get the attendance point. And please do not make quiz answers to attachment file because your response is short and simple, so this activity does not need to produce attachment file. You just write down your name and quiz answers in main body of email. Please do not put the quiz answer in zip file, ZIP file, because you and I use a different operating system of a computer. Therefore, some of a student's zip file, I cannot open it. And the due of this assignment is August 1st, Sunday, midnight. This is the end of the lecture.